Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. The plaintiff before you has a name. His name is Robert Ramirez. His friends call him Bobby. Bobby's story is an American success story. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of a man who was once on the wrong path, changed his life course, and went on a different path. A path that was better than the other path. A path of redemption rather than failure, rather than something worse. The defendant would like you to believe a different story. This is not a story of redemption. Rather, this is a tragedy. A story of a man who was at a higher place and fell to a lower place. He fell to a lower place because of his own weakness. Like King Lear fell from a position of power to a lower place because of his pride. In this case, the defendant would like you to believe that Bobby fell because of his own weakness, whether that's anger or something else. But Bobby has, this is what the defense would like you to believe, that because of Bobby's own actions, he has a bullet to his back, the fragments of which are still lodged within his chest, close to his heart, close to his lungs. That he has a bullet to his back that lodged in his heart, pieces of which lodged in his lung, and which are still there. Bits of fragment where constant movement is difficult for him, where he cannot play with his son, cannot play baseball with his son for pain, cannot play basketball with his friends for the pain. The police officers would like you to believe, the defendants would like you to believe, that is a result of Bobby's own actions. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that, if you accept that story, that's a travesty. A travesty is an alternative story not based on truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we would have you believe in what is true. And the facts will show you that what we present to you today is true. Bobby is a native Chicagoan. He was born and raised in the Rogers Park neighborhood, just not too far from here. He went to elementary school at Joyce Kilmer. He went to high school at Sullivan. Sadly, Bobby's parents divorced at age 7. This affected Bobby greatly, as it would any child. Bobby didn't do very well in school since the divorce. His grades weren't good. He ran into when he entered into junior high and high school, started getting in trouble. In high school, he had petty vandalism. In high school, he was charged with petty theft. High school, he was caught with alcohol as an underage minor. In short, Bobby was on a wrong path. And as a junior in high school, he met Maria. Maria is his wife. And Maria said to him, "You need to straighten up. If there's any future for us, you need to straighten up." This got Bobby's attention. It got Bobby's attention because it gave him hope. And hope is what we all need to get through this life. It was at that moment that Bobby decided to change the course of his life. And his story became a redemptive story. A story where you're on the wrong path and you go to the right one. Bobby became a carpenter, and he's been a carpenter for 13 years. Maria and Bobby got married, and they had a son, Bobby Jr. And Bobby likes to spend time with his friends like any of us do. We all love to have that community friendship. And it was on the night in question, December 6th, 1996, Friday night, that Bobby was with his friends, enjoying the evening, not knowing of the terrible pain that he's going to experience later that evening, and the fear that's going to come his way. Paralyzing fear, where he doesn't know what to do. Bobby went to meet his friends, Joe, Joseph Perone, and Louis Cantelmo. They don't live too far from here either. In fact, Bobby has known Joe and Louis for over 20 years. They're childhood friends. He sees them quite often. So he takes a six-pack, drives down to his friends to enjoy the Chicago Bulls game. And as I said, as a act of camaraderie, brings a six-pack. And they sit down and watch the Chicago Bulls game. After the Chicago Bulls game, they decide to play some gin rummy. A couple hours pass after that, and they decide to go out, and they hit 2 bars. And you will hear the testimony that Bobby had 4 or 5 drinks, scotch and water to be exact. And after the bars close, the 3 friends, Bobby, Joe, and Louie, decide to have a game, a racing game. And they go to Wicker Park and they race to see essentially who's the fastest. Why do they do that? I don't know. Because there's still some childlikeness in all of us. We just want to have fun. So they went out and they raced and they had some fun. Close to 4 in the morning, they decide we need to go home. Louie, Joe, and Bobby get in Louie's car and drive to Louie's house. At that moment, when they get to his house, they depart. Joe goes his way and Bobby goes his way. Bobby heads home. Bobby's heading home, and on his way home, he encounters a Chevy Caprice. It is now 4 in the morning, December 7th, 1996, Pearl Harbor Day. December 7th, I just think of it, Pearl Harbor Day, when I ever hear that date. Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 4 in the morning, 1996. Bobby tries to get around this Chevy Caprice that he sees ahead of him. Coming like this, right? 2 cars. He's coming up, and he tries to pass. He honks his horn because Chevy Caprice pulls to the right or to the left, not letting him pass. Tries to pass again on the left, pulls over. Tries to pass on the right, pulls over. He can't get by this car. Well, that upsets Louie, and he honks his horn some more. Sometime after this cat and mouse game, if you will, the Chevy Caprice pulls over to the right, which allows Bobby to get by him. Bobby stops and starts yelling at him through the window. Was it the smartest thing to do on Bobby? No. Admittedly, no. Bobby should have just gone his way, kept his temper to himself, and said, another day. I just need to go home. He didn't. He stopped. But because he stopped, that is not justification for what happened later. But he stopped. Not the smartest decision, but he did. And it was at this moment that the driver of the Chevy Caprice looks over and gets out of his car. So these two cars are parked like this. Chevy Caprice driver gets out in the front of the car, and so does Bobby, and they get to the front of the car. Chevy Caprice driver starts to argue with Bobby. Bobby calls him an idiot. And at that moment, the Chevy Caprice driver hits him on the face. Fairly hard hit. Shocked him. Bobby retaliated. Again, not the smartest decision, but not justification for what resulted later. Bobby retaliated and hit the Chevy Caprice driver. At that moment, they struggled. They're between the cars now, but they're at the front of the Chevy Caprice. They struggled and they start rolling back to the back of the car. You can kind of see them fisticuffs kind of struggling as they get back, right? That's what happened. Okay. So as they struggle, the Chevy Caprice driver falls towards the back. By his own weight, pushed, we don't know. We just fell. Which, at that moment, Bobby didn't continue the fight. He knew his adversary was on the ground. No need to fight now. He looked up and he noticed another another passenger in the car. As he was distracted by looking at the passenger, the man on the ground hit him in the stomach area. Very tender area, especially for men if you're a little lower, if you know what I mean. Very tender area, which caused Bobby to fall to the ground. That was the driver's of the Chevy Caprice. That was the driver's cue to take the advantage of the situation. What Bobby didn't do, by the way, when he had the advantage with the driver on the ground, Bobby did not take advantage of that. But this driver did. And he got on top of Bobby and put his knee into his side, holding him down. And this is the moment that the Chevy Caprice driver cried out, "Police." There was no mention of a police officer before this moment. Bobby, somewhat surprised, now a little frightened also, because he's fighting a police officer. Not a little frightened, quite a bit frightened. He's fighting a police officer. And Bobby says, "Okay, show me your identification." And his hands go to the ground. Let me paint this picture for you for a moment. Bobby is on his back, looking up like a turtle on his shell. He has a man kneeling into him with all his weight, keeping him from getting down. And now Bobby realizes that this man kneeling into him as he's like a turtle on his shell, this man's a police officer. Not the greatest position for Bobby to be in. So Bobby understands that and puts his hands to the ground, showing his hands are out. There's no weapon in his hand, and says, "Show me some identification." It was at this moment that Levy, who identified himself as police officer, this is now Officer Levy, Officer Levy gets up as he gets up off of Bobby, Bobby, who was a turtle on its shell, turns over to get up himself. So now he's, okay, so he's turning over. Turning over. And it was at this moment that Bobby noticed two shoes standing, presumably the passenger in the Chevy, which we learn later is the defendant, Officer Waldman. And when he sees those shoes, and he's still on the ground now, he's no longer the turtle upside down, but he's now trying to right himself up. He hears this. Crack. And he thinks, and he says, "Why did you kick me?" Unfortunately, that wasn't just a kick. That was a gunshot going in his back. Officer Waldman, at that moment, shot Bobby in the back. He put a bullet in his back that lodged in his heart and in his lung. And he still struggles with the pain today, as we said earlier. Bobby is in and out of consciousness at this time. And he only hears, "What do we do with him?" And the next thing he knows, he is woken up with bright lights and people all around him. He's in Cook County Hospital. And he's going to be at Cook County Hospital for over a month while they repair the damage done by Officer Waldman. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear two different stories. You're going to hear a story of a knife. You're going to hear a story that Bobby attacked Officer Levy with a knife. You're going to hear a story that Bobby was drunk. And you're going to hear a story that Bobby was out of control. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show Bobby was not drunk. There was no knife that Bobby owned. And his actions were not out of control. Ladies and gentlemen, if you accept the story of the defendant, that Bobby is a tragic figure, that he was on the road to redemption, climbing in a respected profession, and he fell because of his own actions. Ladies and gentlemen, if you accept that story, that's a travesty. It's a false application. It's an application of facts that aren't true. So we ask you to not accept the travesty that the defendant wants to bring upon, but recognize the story for what it is, a story of redemption, and a story where a police officer, I don't like contemplating it either, where a police officer who we respect, who I respect, who we expect to tell the truth. But in this case, the story isn't true. So we ask you to reject that story and understand that the police officer, for whatever reason, is trying to give you a false understanding of what happened. That is not just, and that is not truth. And we ask you to stand for what is just, to compensate Bobby for the injuries based upon not his own doing, but based upon the negligent or intentional actions of the officers. We ask that you compensate Bobby for the injuries that he has sustained. And the evidence will show that he should be. Thank you, very much.